As Joe Walsh would say, close the door, push record, I'm ready. Hello again, welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll on this Friday, August 20th, 2004, and what a different day it was than a week ago when Hurricane Charlie threatened to come right down the middle of Dade City and Zephyr Hills, and that would have been a completely different story for all of us. Thankfully, it blew off to the northeast. Unfortunately, some other people were in its way. But we didn't know what was going to happen here for quite a few hours, and extraordinarily frightening day. This is Visigoth, and with us is Thought Criminal.
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Harry's on vacation. Our guest for the full 2 hours will be George Humphrey, who has authored Common Sense, An Introduction to the Dangers of the New World Order, and 9/11, The Great Illusion, the latter of which has now been released on DVD. We'll join George in a minute, but first, archives of all shows can be accessed at visigothsgrassknoll.org and shows.visigothsgrassknoll.org. Now, we're getting a lot of emails about some of the problems with the archives. That's being worked on. Also, your best chance at times is not to do multiple downloads or try at different hours. But still in all, that's going to be cleared up, and we appreciate everybody for hanging with us and also letting us know when things are working and not working. You can access recent shows through radioforall.net. You also can listen to past Grassy Knoll shows and other alternative programming on Live 365. Go to pascoradio.org and check out the schedule. We are also streaming on pascoradio.org and kgrn.info. On either site, just click on Listen Live. You may send an instant message to ask a question of our guest or make a comment at this AOL IM address, that is AM1350 WDCF. You can also shoot an email to me at visigoth@hotmail.com. Visigoth is VYZYGOTH at hotmail.com. Lastly, the views expressed on the Grassy Knoll are not necessarily those of the management, staff, or advertisers of WDCF, WZHR, and the Tan Talk Network. And now to our guest, George Humphrey. George, thank you very much for visiting with us at the Grassy Knoll.
Well, it's certainly an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to the people in Florida today.
Well, you know, I want to tell a story, which you would not, I know, about the kind of character that you do possess. When I first contacted you, I told you flat out that we had used excerpts of Common Sense on the show. We had not asked permission. We did give you full credit. And I said that to you, and your first remark was, I don't care about the money, just get the message out. And I really appreciated that. And I want people to know that those 3 excerpts are on Radio for All right now. And so if you've not heard about George Humphrey, or even if you have, a Common Sense, which we'll talk about in this first hour, is excerpted on radioforall.net. And if we could, now, George, that originally was in book form and then went off to audio cassettes. Is that true?
Well, it's still in booklet form. That was my first booklet that I wrote on this, and clearly it was after one of our founding fathers, Tom Paine's Common Sense. That is Common Sense, An Introduction to the Dangers of the New World Order. It's about 60 pages long. I've kept it very short, and it is aimed at those who are just learning about what is the New World Order, who is the power elite, what is the Illuminati, what is the history of this, is there really a conspiracy, and what's going on. So we put it in terms that are very understandable and clear and linear so that people can get a grasp of this amazing set of events that are affecting our world and nation.
Well, I think you did a great job, and linear is a good way to explain it. It is an A to Z type situation, and it's not all that in-depth. You cannot treat these subjects as in-depth as you would like, but at least you gave everyone an overview. They can go and check out for themselves, which I would assume you would want them to do anyway.
Oh, of course. I have a television show here in town, and I was a city councilman, and so a lot of people know me. But wherever I speak, whether it's on radio or television, I always say, just listen to what I'm saying and listen with a very discerning mind. Your heart will know what's right or wrong, but check out all of the information. Don't believe me or Tom Brokaw or anybody when you first hear it. Power is knowledge. Knowledge is power, Sir Francis Bacon said. And at the end of all of my booklets, at the end of my documentary, at the end of my audio books, I always have a lot of references. And I invite and encourage people to check this information out.
By the way, one technical question with regard to this broadcast. Are we coming okay through the phone to you?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, there's no distortion then?
No.
All right, thanks a lot, because we're still in the process of working on things. Let me ask you, when did you get wise to what was going on? What were the events in your life that led you to say, listen, there is something down the rabbit hole?
Well, I was a member of the Austin City Council in the mid-1980s. I have a degree in economics, and so during the mid-1980s, I was in charge of a fairly large budget of over about $1 billion. And after I left the city council, I thought I was pretty sharp about economics, but I was at a conference. I was one of the people who helped start the Reform Party, the offshoot of the H. Ross Perot. And we went to one of our founding meetings, and the people there, we were ready to run through walls to bring reform to this country, but some of the people who were in charge, no matter what we said, they were saying, no, we can't do that, we can't do that. It became very clear to me very early on that the Reform Party was actually a Trojan horse. So I walked out, and I was very frustrated, and there was a gentleman outside, and he had a table, and it had all this money on it. And his name was Byron Black, and he wrote a book called Bashed by the Bankers. And he started telling me that the Federal Reserve Board was neither federal, there was no reserves, and it wasn't a board. It was, in fact, a private organization. Most of the shareholders were European financiers. But then he started explaining to me what fractional reserve banking was. And even I thought I was pretty smart, but for 3 days I sat and talked with him, and I couldn't figure it out. It was so easy to figure out, but my own conditioning through college and through my work was so strong that I couldn't see the obvious. And on the last day, something clicked, and I realized that the whole scenario, our whole banking system, was a total, complete fraud. And I almost became physically ill there. It was one of the most amazing shifts. And so at that time, I had a choice because I was planning on running for U.S. Congress here. And I knew that if I pursued this, that option would close off to me. But fortunately, there were a lot of good people around me. And suddenly, as that door opened, many, many people started coming forward with information about the New World Order and about the amazing conspiracy that was taking place not only economically but to our cultural, political, and ecclesiastical institutions. And within, a couple of weeks, I was hooked, and for the next 9 months, I did nothing but read.
If there is one common thread through this whole centuries-long global conspiracy, it seems that it is that at the core are the bankers, are the money people.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. Money is what makes the world go around. And when I first got involved in politics, and I've done political work all my life, is when I first got on the inside and I had to figure something out. I was told, follow the money, much like in The Wizard of Oz, like the yellow brick road is the gold road. And so follow the money. And when one does objective historical research, starting at any part or any time in the history of mankind about who the controllers are, you will always see that the bankers or the moneylenders or those who control the credit are the ones who are the main manipulators. Here in the West, the start of the Western Bavarian Illuminati was Adam Weishaupt, and of course behind him was his money man, Rothschild, who said, I care not who makes the laws as long as I print the money. And, you go back to the 1700s and the 1800s the same way, 1900s, and today we have the IMF and the World Bank and the Federal Reserve Board all using the insidious fractional reserve banking system, which is nothing more than a Ponzi scheme. And clearly, debt and the creation of debt is the main instrument of the puppet masters.
We'll get into that further on because that is covered in Common Sense.
Yeah.
Now, when you found out that things do go bump in the night, did you resolve to do something about it then, or did you have to think about it, or how did that strike you?
Well, this was an evolving process. When I first found out about this, I first of all had to make the decision of whether I was going to go forward. And as Winston Churchill said, he said most men at some time in their life are knocked down when they run into the truth. Most people just get up and brush themselves off and pretend like nothing happened. And fortunately, as I said, there were good people around me who started giving me other information. So it made it easy for me, and I went forward. But at first I was hesitant about sharing this information with others because I had been an elected public official, and I realized if I went forward with this, it would have been met with a lot of ridicule. But after lots and lots of prayer, I realized that my inner voice and the Spirit and God were telling me I had to do what was right for not only the world and our nation, but most importantly for my family and myself. And I finally went public in the early 1990s, and there was ridicule at the start. Many of the people that I knew and who I'd worked with were, they'd talk about the black helicopters and they'd laugh, and some of my very dear friends actually got very mad at me. But what I have found is that most of those people, actually every single one of those people who ridiculed me or got mad at me in the early 1900s have since come around and realized that what we are talking about, and when I say we, is that the patriots, all, not only across this country, but all across the world who are speaking about this, is that wherever I go now, whether it's to the grocery store or down the swimming pool or to my job site, is that people are coming up and wanting to know more and more. Everybody knows something is wrong, and if you can speak to people with sincerity and without trying to knock them over and give them information and be kind but yet direct with them, people are hungry for this information.
All right. Moving on from your resolve to do what you did, when did you go to work on Common Sense?
When did I go to work on it?
Yep.
Oh, I went to work studying this back in the early probably 1991, and because this was my first booklet, it was a learning process, and I think I'd knew things, and then the next week people would come in, and there were a lot of people who were very involved in my education system. One person who I learned a great deal from in the early 1900s was a lady by the name of D.V. Kidd. She wrote a booklet called Why a Bankrupt America that is a very short little booklet that talks about the Federal Reserve. And I remember back in 1991 or 1992, I was talking to her, and I kept on saying, well, we've got to save our democracy. We've got to save our democracy. And D.V., she got me. She said, look, George, we are not a democracy. We are a republic. And I hear this all the time today. Good people with good intentions still are saying the importance of saving the democracy. But there were many people in the early 1990s, and so I started writing Common Sense back in about 1996, and I first published it in 1998. And then in the year 2001, I published another booklet called Uncommon Sense, Your Choice, the Blue Pill or the Red Pill. And then a year and a half ago, I published the book 911, The Great Illusion. And just in the last couple of months, I've come out with my documentary about, my 2-hour documentary about 911, which is exceeding all of my expectations for success.
That's great to hear, and I think that's an indication, without a doubt, that more people are starting to become aware and really can't refuse the fact that that elephant is indeed in their room. We're speaking with George Humphrey, author of Common Sense, An Introduction to the Dangers of the New World Order, 9/11, The Great Illusion, and as you just heard also, Uncommon Sense. We'll be back with him after these messages. Well, we have some audio problems, so we're going to just forget about the bumper. We're with George Humphrey, author of Common Sense, An Introduction to the Dangers of the New World Order, also 9/11, The Great Illusion. And George, can you give us some ordering information where people might be able to find out more about what you do?
Well, absolutely. There's many ways you can get a hold of us. First of all, most people are on the Internet. My Internet website is www.fearorlove.com. fearorlove.com. And basically, one of the main messages that I have is that we all have a choice. We can retract in fear and we can go along with this insanity, or we can, really figure out who we are, is that we're divine, wonderful, beautiful souls, and we're strong and sovereign, and we can deal with this in the proper way. And so it's fearorlove.com. Now, to write us, you can reach us at George Humphrey, Common Sense, P.O. Box 5772, Austin, Texas 78763. And all of my booklets, I have 3 different booklets. They're all very, very reasonably priced. They're almost basically the cost of the printing. I keep the booklets relatively short, between 60 to 80 pages. We have lots and lots of pictures in the books. 9/11, The Great Illusion, which is about clearly 9/11. We have 45 color pictures in there, and so it is very, very inexpensive. It is, for one book, it's only $3.50. For 2 to 9, it's $3. For 100 or more, it's $1.50. You can also reach us, if you want to reach us by email, is commonsense@fearorlove.com. commonsense@fearorlove.com. So we make it as easy as possible for you all to reach us.
And really, some people say their work is reasonably priced or even unreasonably priced, favoring the consumer. But in your case, you certainly did do that, and people should check that out and not just take that as just words.
Well, and the reason for that, quite clearly, I'm sure that you're doing this radio show not to make $1 million. You are, you're like me, is that we put in our time and our energy and our money because we love this country. We believe in the American dream. We believe in the Republic. We believe in our families, and we believe that there should be a level playing field, and that the people who run this country should be telling the truth. And quite clearly, all of these things are not what's happening. Our nation is moving at exponential rates toward a massive police state. We're already in one, and toward tyranny. But we do have a secret weapon, and that is the truth. And radio shows like yours and booklets and documentaries like mine, we are giving out the information so that the good people of this country can have a different point of view. And I sincerely believe that a vast majority of people, if given the right information, will make the right decisions.
Going back to Common Sense, I'm not going to approach this as you did it in the cassettes. I was thinking more on a chronological line, because I think it's important, and you can refute that or bear that out, that this whole situation that we're witnessing now has some irony as far as where it began, and that is kind of the collision of West and East with the Templars and the Assassins. Is that true?
Well, there's no question, and there's an old saying that those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. And unfortunately, we in the West are taught history. The victors always teach what they want, but what we don't realize is that the evolution of Occidental history has been very affected by the Middle East, by the invasions of the invasions in the 1300s, and the Templars and the Assassins, which were organizations back in the Middle East, have significantly affected, especially the secret societies that now control our country. The Knights Templars, which were formed during the Crusades, and I would guess that most of your listeners know who the Knights Templars are. Is that a correct assumption?
It is, but you never know when somebody's tuning in for the first time. For the sake of it, though, would you mind giving us a thumbnail?
Well, during the early part of the Crusades, and the early part of the Crusades were in the early 1300s, and approximately 2 years after the First Crusades began, 9 knights came together in a really high level of nobility and chivalry, and they pledged to protect the pilgrims that were traveling to the Holy Land. And this group of knights grew in number, and they originally were called the Militia Templi, or the Knights of the Temple. And they made 2 pledges: that they would live in chastity, and that they would never turn in battle, that they would, unless they were outnumbered, at least 4-1. And because of their bravery, the kings of Europe supported them and started giving them lots and lots and lots of titles and nobility back in Europe. Well, as with all organizations that grow in prosperity, is that the Crusades start going badly, and a lot of the Knights Templars who were not born in Europe, they were born in the Middle East, in Jerusalem and Syria. They had Arabic as their first language. They came in contact with a group called the Assassins, which was a very, very unusual occult group that was in the Middle East that had really taken control of a lot of the hearts and minds of people in the Middle East. And they were not really a spiritual group, but they were very, very strong, very secretive. And they had 13 levels of initiation. Well, the Knights Templars brought this back to Europe, and by the time the Crusades were kind of winding down, you had the Knights Templars in Europe as perhaps the most powerful political force, because they didn't have to pay taxes and they had all this free land. Well, along comes William the Fair, who was the King of France, and he had been fighting a war and he was out of money, and he looks over and he sees the Knights Templars, and they have these vaults full of gold, and so he said, I need that gold. So on Friday the 13th, he ordered his sheriffs to go in and arrest all the Templars. Well, the sheriffs went through France on Friday the 13th, and that's why we get the saying about it being an unlucky day, and they raided the Knight Templars' vaults and arrested many of them, and then tortured them into to confessing that they were doing all sorts of things.
Can I ask you something at this point?
Yes.
Curious, though, isn't it true that the Knights Templar might have been the first bankers? Didn't they devise a chit system for their pilgrims and such?
Well, they had the chit system, and they used one of the systems that they used was they used this long stick that they would notch. They were the first ones to talk or write about the United States of Europe, and getting objective information about what the Knights Templars were or were not doing is not always easy, because a lot of the information is based upon information that was gained from torture when Philip the Fair went in and did a lot of the torture. Now, the leader of the Knights Templars then was a fellow by the name of Jacques de Molay, and he and some of the other Knights Templars were burned at the stake at that period of time. But most of the Knights Templars at that time got out of France and got out of Europe, and they went up to northern Scotland. And it's really interesting because they were on the run. They hooked up with a fellow by the name of Earl of Bruce. And I'm sure you saw that movie called
Braveheart? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the Earl of Bruce had not helped William Wallace in the revolt against the British. But by the time the Knights Templars got up there, Longshanks had died, and Earl of Bruce had gotten a little bit more mature and gained his bravery, and the Knights Templars helped him, and they were able, with the Knights Templars' help, they were able to defeat the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, and for the next 200 years, Scotland had independence.
A question about the Templar fortune. That really never was found, was it?
Only very, very small proportions of it were found. A vast majority of the gold of the Templars was spirited out of the country, and most believe it was taken up to Scotland.
This is just a little conversation for this last minute, George. There is some rumor, though, isn't it, that there are treasure hunters seeking it in the south of France?
Well, that's possible. I mean, people are always looking for treasure, but in my readings, I sure haven't come across where that money is or where it was spent.
Yeah, this is just about some. I heard a show that had two people that supposedly had it, and with all these signs and such. But you never know; it could be urban or even a rural legend. At any rate, no one really has found it. We're with George Humphrey. We're talking about, well, in a way, how this current conflagration between West and East, between Islam and Christendom, isn't really all that new. That it may date back about another 9 centuries, beginning with the Templars and the Assassins. You're listening to AM 1350 WDCF. This is the Grassy Knoll. This is Visigoth. Thought Criminals with me. We'll be back with George Humphrey after these messages. Before we go back to George Humphrey, I saw this today. Somebody brought in a book called Bushisms, and I don't have any umbrage towards George Bush than I do Bill Clinton. I mean, they're all handled. They're all there, but George is turning out to be extremely entertaining. Here's one for you that he made in Washington, D.C. on April 13, 2003. This is George Bush. You're free, and freedom is beautiful. And, it'll take time to restore chaos and order out of chaos, but we will. What do you think of that, George?
Well, George Bush, this president, lived right in my neighborhood, and many of my neighbors are good friends of his. And so I've known for a long time that even though on a personal level he's very likable, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. And as you said before, clearly Clinton were bought and paid for and are puppets of much, much more powerful people.
Exactly. And I'm not piling on, Bush. I mean, and even this show, a lot of Democrats like it because they think we're directing this towards Republicans, and we're not. We're directing it toward the government, which is corrupt.
We're both equal opportunity bashers. I'll bash a Democrat or a Republican if they are going against our country or going against our republic. And going back in the early 1900s, there was a U.S. Supreme Court justice. His name was Felix Frankfurter. I think he was the first Jewish U.S. Supreme Court justice. Mm-hmm. And he said the real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes.
Picking it up with the Knights Templar, they are the forerunners, are they not? When you mention the name Jacques de Molay, right, de Molay, which of course is the youth branch of the Freemasons. The Freemasons, yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
So can we extrapolate that the Knights Templar gave rise to Freemasonry?
Well, I have done a tremendous amount of reading and research on this, as have many other people. And there are still a lot of loose ends and threads in the story. But what I think most people will agree upon is that after the Battle of Bannockburn, is that the Templars wanted to become invisible, and that the King of England didn't want to pursue it because he had been humiliated. Everybody wanted to, hush the story up. So many of the Templars went underground. They started marrying into the clans, and they started becoming master masons and builders. And between 1100 to about 1500, they started building these great cathedrals, and the quality of building increased. But then there was, after the 30-year War, is that there was a real slowdown, and that these master guilds started becoming more social or political. And the relatives or the lineage of the Templars were still there, and the creation of the Freemasons down in London was started. And the exact history of the Freemasons is really a matter of big debate. There are three very, very interesting personalities who are involved in it, and one was Robert Moray, who was the first recorded initiate to a Masonic lodge in England in 1641, and he was a member of the Scots Guard, and that was another secret society. Another important figure was Elias Ashmole, who was a soldier, and he was an astrologer and a Rosicrucian, and one of the co-founders of the Royal Society, which, when you do this information and research, is totally bound up in the Freemasons and in the Knights Templars. And perhaps the most important one is Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon was the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth, and he was conceived while Queen Elizabeth was in the Tower of London, but when she was brought on the throne, she never declared him as the son. And Sir Francis Bacon was an incredible soul. He traveled all through Europe, and many people believe that he was the guiding light or the inspiration behind William Shakespeare and the Shakespearean plays. And many, many people believe that he was one of the prime movers and shakers of Freemasonry. And it's my belief that when Freemasonry was first started, it was a fairly progressive organization trying to right some of the wrongs. But with all things, Freemasonry evolved and grew, and because it was secret and it did start taking on some of the occult teachings from the Templars from long ago, it quickly devolved into an organization that I don't think is for the best of this nation right now.
Well, now for the Freemasons to obtain the geometry they needed to build what they did in Europe, did that not come from the Middle East and through the Knights Templar who brought it back to Europe?
Well, quite clearly, when the European kings invaded the Middle East, is that the level of scientific and astrological and mathematical learning was far, far, far advanced in the Middle East. And the Knights Templars were no dummies. They learned a lot of the mathematical teachings of the Middle East, and they kept them as basically secrets for themselves. And so it wasn't just an occult secret thing. A lot of the teachings were very much bound up into how to build a better mousetrap. And that's one of the reasons that the Knights Templars had so much success. And one of the things that they did bring back with them was a lot of, I'd say, ways of keeping things secret, but also banking techniques. And so, but the big problem is because it was a secret organization, it is hard to get objective information.
All right. I also find it interesting that the Templars would repair back to Scotland, and of course one of the branches of Freemasonry is Scottish Rite.
Oh, of course.
And the other one, I believe, is, what is it? Royal Arch, is that? Do you remember? There's two of them.
Well, there was the Catholic branch that started in France and in Ireland, and in the Catholic branch, unfortunately, is that the Parisian group was called the Royal Orient. I think it was called the Royal Orient, and they
Grand Orient, perhaps.
Yeah,
okay.
It was the Masonic Royal Orient, and they're the ones who gave us the Statue of Liberty. Now, they went bad very quickly because they were infiltrated in the late 1700s by Adam Weishaupt and the Rothschilds. The group out of London kept a little higher level of ethics for a period of time, and most people who are your listeners know that a fairly high percentage of our founding fathers were Masons,
right.
And they were in many ways were bringing a higher level of teaching and learning to the colonies.
Now, was it the Bavarian Lodge of Freemasonry that also became the Illuminati? Did that offshoot from Weishaupt's Masonry?
No. Well,
okay.
Adam Weishaupt, who started the Bavarian Illuminati on May 1st, 1776, again, he's another very shadowy figure, but he infiltrated some of the Masonic lodges back in the late 1770s, and there was a real battle at the time between those who were supporting Weishaupt and those who were not supporting him. And so we don't, because they were secret organizations, we don't know which group succumbed to his point of view. We do know that the group in Paris was taken over by Weishaupt, and thus we had the French Revolution. And what happened in the French Revolution is very few Americans have ever studied or understand how tyrannical that situation was.
That almost was a forerunner, though, too, for what I would assume they're still trying to perpetrate, and that is a global revolution.
Absolutely. It is mobocracy.
Right.
And when the French Revolution started, it started with a lot of high ideals, liberté, equality,
fraternity,
democracy. But very, very quickly, Robespierre and his group of thugs, they started murdering and guillotining anybody who had an education, anybody who was an aristocrat, anybody who had their own business, anybody who was a churchgoer. And for a period of time, the French Revolution was perhaps the most insidious and the worst civil war ever to take place in Western Europe. And not thousands or hundreds of thousands, but millions of French were just summarily murdered. And it was because of Adam Weishaupt, who believed that the ends justified the means. And quite clearly, even though he talked about liberty and equality, it was all about one thing: power for his group and for his chosen illuminated group, which is what we're having today.
And so this movement towards a one world order, much like what was being forwarded back before the French Revolution, it sounds so good, but it must be attractive for anyone to buy into it. But it really is a trap, isn't it?
Well, it's just an amazing trap. And this is what Adam Weishaupt, this is a direct quote from Adam Weishaupt. He said, "The most wonderful thing of all is that the distinguished Lutheran and Calvinistic theologians who belong to our order really believe that they see it, the Illuminati, as the true and genuine sense of Christian religion. O mortal man, is there anything you cannot be made to believe?" And quite clearly, Weishaupt realized that to infiltrate and to take over is that he had to divide and conquer, and that lying, because Weishaupt was atheistic, he had no moral compass. And so again, the ends justified the means. And the end was absolute total control for he and his group of henchmen.
We're talking with George Humphrey, author of Common Sense, an introduction to the dangers of the New World Order, and also 9/11, the Great Illusion. We'll be back with him after these words. We're back at the Grassy Knoll. This is Bisgoth with Thought Criminal. You're listening to AM 1350 WDCF, Dade City, Zephyr Hills, New Tampa. We have with us George Humphrey. And George, would you give the listeners some information as to how they can order your materials and also how they can find out more about what you do?
Well, most certainly. First of all, we have a wonderful website. It's www.fearorlove.com. Fearorlove.com. And we have a full catalog in there. We have articles. We have a lot of information, a tremendous number of links. So that's fearorlove.com. You can also write us at George Humphrey, Common Sense, P.O. Box 5772, P.O. Box 5772, and that's Austin, Texas, 78763. Or if you want to send us an email, that's Common Sense, one word, at fearorlove.com. Common Sense at fearorlove.com. And I have a person who does all the shipping. She's a wonderful patriot, Leah Lewis, and we get the orders out with a smile, and you get a lot of value for your money. And I'll tell you what, when we first started doing this, maybe 8-9 years ago, we get 3 or 4 orders a day, and now every day we go in and the post office box is totally full. Every single day, more and more people are waking up, and I am so fortunate because I get to talk to people all over, not only Texas or across the United States, but all over the world who are waking up to what's going on.
I want to inject a little bit of levity, if I can, into this. Unfortunately, the site of Bush's statements were Waco, Texas. This was August 13th, 2002. And he said, there may be some tough times here in America, but this country has gone through rough times before, and we're going to do it again. Attaboy, George.
He's really an interesting guy.
Yeah.
And he comes from Midland, and a lot of my friends are from Midland. And you know that Jeb Bush Jeb is the really bright brother, and Jeb was
right.
That they were going to run for president, but there are a lot of skeletons in Jeb's closet, and so they had to hold off on running him for president. But quite clearly, most of your listeners know that George W. was a member of this notorious fraternity called Skull and Bones, as is Carey. And, how can you be any more obvious? The symbol of pirates is the Skull and Bones, and not only the leader of the Democratic but of the Republican parties are members of Skull and Bones. And George W., his nickname at Skull and Bones is Temporary, and he's not a long-term player.
One thing, that the number associated with Skull and Bones, 322, does that not refer back to a lodge in Europe?
Well, the Skull and Bones was an offshoot of the Illuminati lodges. Now, after the French Revolution, the Illuminati went underground, but they surfaced in the United States with the first Columbian Lodge of the Order of the Illuminati in New York in 1785. And shortly thereafter, there were 14 more Illuminati lodges started here in the United States. And you look at some of the members of the Columbian Lodge of the Illuminati. You have DeWitt Clinton, who was the governor of New York, and then you had Clinton Roosevelt, who was the great uncle of FDR. You had Horace Greeley, who was a very, very famous guy and who was the founder of the term communism. And so there were all these Illuminati lodges, but this didn't go unnoticed. George Washington tried to shut them down and called the Illuminati lodges diabolical, and he talked about the dangers of foreign influence. John Adams made the Illuminati, or the penetration of the Illuminati Lodge, his number one campaign issue in 1796. So when people say, when you talk about the Illuminati, this is all conspiracy theory, well, we're in pretty good company with George Washington and John Adams.
Oh, certainly. And this is not theory. I mean, that's the whole thing.
It's not theory. It's just absolute historic fact.
And would you agree when people say to me, oh, I bet it's a conspiracy? And I'm saying, you know what? For centuries, the world's been run by conspiracies.
Well, anybody who doesn't believe in conspiracy is absolutely not paying attention or is intentionally ignorant. There has been conspiracy since the beginning of man. Since the beginning of man, a small number have always conspired, and the word conspiracy means with breathing. It's just part of what goes on, and the conspiracy has been there to manipulate others. And not to believe in conspiracy just shows one's ignorance.
We're going to be taking a top of the hour break, George, but if you don't mind, I know I'm lagging a bit behind. Can we stay with Common Sense a little bit more and past the top of the hour?
We can do whatever you want to do.
All right. Okay. I mean, I just find this fascinating, and again, to understand what's going on today, people have to understand that this has roots centuries ago. Now, in Common Sense, you mentioned about the amalgam of the Rothschild banking family and Weishaupt, and this did a great deal, did it not, to really jettison the Illuminati cause?
Well, absolutely. It is the foundation, and they have absolutely, as we said before, follow the money. And all of the major banks, the IMF, the World Bank, the Federal Reserve, are all controlled by the Rothschild Banking Trust. It's just a fact. And if you don't understand that, then you are open for manipulation. And when people do not understand fractional reserve banking, then they don't understand the manipulation of our economy and thus our political and cultural institutions.
You know, fast forwarding to these days, and I'm going to ask you your opinion on this because I don't think anybody really knows. It's not speculation, but I think it's trying to extrapolate with the information that is known, that perhaps Europe and North America have been driven by a Zionist, perhaps, clique of the New World Order, and it may not be shared perhaps by Russia and China and such. I've always thought that the State of Israel, and this is separated from true Jewry, but the State of Israel has always been the Zionists' gadfly in the ointment, if you will. And we're seeing really the culmination of that today, that, you know, I don't need to support the Masonic State of Israel if I am a Christian, and I do believe in the Judeo-Christian ethic, and that is I do believe that the Jewish people are the apple of Yahweh's eye. But this Masonic State of Israel is no friend to me, and I really do. It's always been propped up by the Zionists of both Europe and North America, and especially the Rothschild banking house. How do you feel about that?
Well, what you're talking about is the third rail of American political talk. Because just as most Christians know little or nothing about the history of Christian culture, most Jewish people know little or nothing about the history of the Semitic tribes. And it is because this is such an emotional issue, we have to be very articulate, because most people don't know the difference between a Hebrew, a Semite, an Israelite, what is a Jew, what is spiritual Zionism, what is modern Zionism, and what is political Zionism. And so because it is such a manipulated issue, it is so important to be very articulate. Mm-hmm. Quite clearly, political Zionism controls the banking, the political, and the cultural institutions of Northern Europe and the Western Hemisphere. And in my opinion, it is no friend of the people of this country or people who believe in the Republic or in freedom. And it's very, very sensitive, and it is no friend of true Jews either.
So can I ask you, do you see a strain there amongst, shall we say, Western Zionism that has done much to prop up Israel for perhaps ulterior motives?
Well, of course, because clearly the Rothschild Banking Trust in the Red Shield is that Rothschild and Weishaupt were Ashkenazi. And I don't know if your listeners know what Ashkenazi means, but Ashkenazi Jewish people do not have Semitic blood in them. And unfortunately is that a group of Ashkenazis are very active in the political Zionist movement. Now, there are many Ashkenazi Jews who are wonderful and beautiful people. They are honest and good, and they are good Jews. But most Jews and most Christians have no idea what an Ashkenazi or a Sephardic Jew is. They don't know the history, and they have no concept about what political Zionism is. And until we educate people about this, whether they be Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, whatever, is that the puppeteers, the people who are the illusion makers, will continue to manipulate us with all this bogus information, and they will continue to divide us. And that's why shows like this, in which we can speak and debate and share information, are so important.
We're with George Humphrey, author of Common Sense, an introduction to the dangers of the New World Order, and about a book and a DVD later on about which we will speak, and that is 9/11, The Great Illusion. George, we're going to take a break till 5 after the hour, and we'll all do what we have to do, and we'll rejoin you then. Thank you very much for listening to the Grassy Knoll, and join us for the second hour coming up.